Today on CityCast Philly, Philadelphians can proudly wear cowboy hats. Do you know why? Because we invented them. Today, host Trinae Nuri revisits a conversation about how this North Philly invention got co-opted by cowboys. It's Monday, April 7th. I'm Abby Fritz, filling in for Trinae Nuri, and here's what Philly's talking about.
WHYY's midday host, Avi Wolfman-Arent, you do this regular segment on Twitter called Headlines of Yore, where you find a really old Philly news story and you explore its historical significance. Sometimes these headlines are more than 100 years old, but you discovered something pretty surprising. Cowboy hats were invented in Philly. Avi, why would Philadelphians need a cowboy hat?
Well, it's a good question. I don't think they did. I think this is a story of someone going out into the rest of the country, getting an idea for what other people need, and then coming back to Philly and making it here. Because to situate us, we're talking about the middle of the 19th century, the 1800s, when lots of stuff was made in Philadelphia. And a guy named John B. Stetson, and you might have heard that name around Philly every once in a while because of a building or a street. He went out west as a young man, said these people need better hats, and came back to Philly and started making them here.
Well, now I feel some type of way that's like, I'm an Eagles fan. It's like anything cowboy related. I'm just like, But what was not working when he saw hats in other parts of the country?
So the story, and look, I'm not a hat expert, but this is just a legend that's passed down, is that when he went out there in the middle part of the 1800s, Stetson saw a lot of people wearing like straw hats and bowler hats. I don't know if people know bowler hats anymore, but if you could sometimes still see them in old Westerns.
Are they like the smaller, like rounder
Yes,
hats,
yeah, exactly.
right?
Like the round crown on top and like the smaller brim. And what he supposedly saw when he looked at all these people wearing hats were hats that were flea infested and not waterproof and not particularly good at blocking out the sun, which can be, oppressive when you're out on the plains or the prairie, and said, like, we could do better.
Interesting. So how did Philadelphians react to these hats, though?
I don't know. I didn't come across anything about how Philadelphians felt about the hats, other than the fact that for generations, many Philadelphians worked at the Stetson factory, which was sort of like on the edge of Kensington. And there was, like a lot of generational labor lore around working in this factory. It was a huge factory that had its own hospital and had its own like Sunday school. I don't know. I mean, maybe you would know, Trinae. Like, I don't think the cowboy hat has ever caught on in Philadelphia. You mentioned
definitely not, especially from an Eagles fan.
Yeah, it's certainly more popular in Dallas, which I think is great because it's one more thing we have over Dallas. This is the thing they take the most pride in, and a Philadelphian more or less invented it, and it was produced here originally.
And were they even calling them cowboy hats back then?
I don't know at what point in history they became known as cowboy hats. I do know that the hats made by John B. Stetson and his company became known just as Stetsons. And you can hear there are popular songs that mention Stetsons, people wearing Stetsons. Even to this day, someone might call a cowboy hat a Stetson.
So, Avi, can you take us back a little bit? How did this Jersey-born Philly hat maker start to get into hat making?
So he came from a hat-making family, is what I understand. So he was from Jersey, and I should mention, he wasn't from South Jersey, so he did not grow up in the area. But his dad was in the hat-making business, so he had some exposure to hat making and, I guess the idea of it maybe being a career. What his dad did was not nearly on the scale of what he would end up doing. He ended up starting and founding this humongous factory. But they were in the clothing business, and he took it way further than any of his ancestors did.
Can you tell us more about Stetson's factory? It was one of the biggest hat making factories of the time.
Yeah, so this is the part that as a Philadelphian is the most interesting to me because it's the part that speaks the most to like our city's history. So when Stetson came back west, he actually opened an initial shop at 4th and Chestnut Streets. So you can imagine like right in the heart of the action, but not a lot of space to expand. And so when sales took off from his first hat, which was called the Boss of the Plains, I love that name, the Boss of the Plains. He opened up a factory that's at the intersection, I don't know if people can picture it, of 5th and Montgomery and Germantown Avenue, which is like right on the edge of what we call Kensington now. Kensington at the time, big factory neighborhood, big industrial neighborhood. This is like in the 1870s, opens up this factory. And by about the 1920s, so over the next 50 years, it grew to the point where it was the largest hat factory in the world, 1.4 million square feet, which is mind-blowing to me. Just to imagine that today, anything in Kensington of that size. It employed somewhere on the order of 5,000 people. And you can imagine this as a factory, but when you look at the pictures of it, it's more like a campus. It's more like, it looks almost like a college campus. Like I mentioned earlier, there was an accredited hospital there on the grounds. There was, in the neighborhood nearby, they ran their own school. It was like a Sunday school, but it was their own factory school for the workers, for the families. And this is a world that doesn't exist as much in Philadelphia anymore, where the factory was almost its own world, its own city, its own society. So many people worked there over many generations. They had their own little sphere, their own little world, and it was all based around working at this one company.
Is the factory still there, or pieces of it at least?
So my understanding is that most of it has been demolished, but I believe the hospital, the factory hospital, is still standing, or at least part of it. So the factory was open until 1971 when it ceased operations, and then it was demolished afterwards, and I believe there was a fire that hastened its decline. Most of it at this point is no more, but I believe part of, or perhaps all of the little hospital building is still standing. So there's some vestiges of it.
How do stories like this, like Stetton's history in our city, not get lost again?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know if there's an easy answer to it. And I don't want to presume to be a historian or a preservationist, because there are people who do that stuff for a living, who really live in this world. And I'm totally an amateur. But my little slice of it, I think, is just reminding people that these little interesting stories are out there, to look for them, to listen for them. And hopefully that piques people's interest and gets them a little bit more invested in this place and the people who have been here before. I find it not just interesting to look through Philly's history, but also comforting in a sense, because you can find that people have been dealing with the same problems, having the same issues and the same triumphs over and over and over again. And there are answers in our past. And there are hopeful stories and there are depressing stories, but a lot of times they are similar stories. And you can find little keys, I think, that help you make sense of the present a little bit better. And that's what I enjoy about it. And I just hope that this project that I'm doing, this little weekly project, gets more people interested. And if more people are interested, then more stories will be told and preserved.
Well, I'm definitely interested. You've got me sold.
Yes, we got one.
WHYY's midday host, Avi Wolfman-Arent. Thanks so much for joining me today on CityCast Philly.
Absolutely. Thanks, Trinae.
We'll have a link to Avi's Twitter thread detailing the history of the cowboy hat in our show notes. And now, here's producer Abby Fritz with what else Philly's talking about.
The Fashion District Mall has had it with teenagers. WHYY reports that the mall will now require those under 18 to come with an adult after 2 p.m. The new rule comes after a crowd of hundreds of young people reportedly gathered in Center City, and a cop was injured. And right across from Love Park, construction has started on a public bathroom that is not a porta potty. According to Billy Penn, this is the first of the 6 Portland loos, or standalone bathrooms, that will be installed across the city over the next 5 years. To learn more about these public restrooms and where else to pee in Philly, listen to host Trinae Nuri talk with landscape architect Ari Miller at the link in our show notes. It's time for the tip of the day, where we share a life hack for living in Philly. The FDR Bridge is closed for repairs for the next 2 years. Now, bikers, nature lovers, pedestrians, and even some horseback riders are wondering how they'll access the popular Riverside Trail from Center City. But there are other ways to get there. The city has recommended some alternate routes for pedestrians from Girard Ave to the Girard Bridge. For bikers, the Bicycle Coalition of Greater Philadelphia suggests taking Kelly Drive around the Art Museum to Girard Ave and then across the Girard Bridge. For more routes, check the link in our show notes. If you have a tip of the day, we'd love to hear from you too. Call or text us at 215-259-8170. That's all for today here on CityCast Philly. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend? Rate the show, leave us a review, and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to sign up for our morning newsletter too. It's called Hey Philly. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.